Welcome to A Case for Cannabis. My name is Alfredo Matthew. I am your host today, and I am speaking with Amy Jenkins. It is a pleasure to have you from Precision Advocacy.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
So this is one of my first interviews with a political lobbyist who also has a nickname that I've never heard of for a lobbyist, Pot Girl. Tell me a little bit about how you got this nickname and how you got into the lobbying industry.
Well, I have spent the last 26 years working on public policy, primarily at the state level. I started in the state legislature, took a brief foray out, worked in the local government arena, and then decided to go back to the state legislature where I started to explore cannabis policy with my former boss, who was in the Senate at the time. And so Pot Girl really evolved after we decided to take a risk and try to engage in this space and create a solid policy framework to regulate and license medicinal cannabis. And I was one of the first staffers at the time to engage in this issue and do it successfully. However, we were unable to get our bill over the finish line. This was in 2014. And so he termed out, and I wanted to continue to pursue this issue. We got really, really close to getting our bill to the governor and felt that lobbying was the best mechanism or way to achieve this goal, with that being approving a medicinal framework through the legislature.
What attracted you to this industry, right? Today, everyone is like, oh, cannabis this, cannabis that, right? It is. I'm not going to say it's mainstream because it still is a stigma. There's, there's a lot of activity and a lot of talk. Prior to 2015, 2016, this was even more taboo. What allowed you to kind of make that call that you wanted to pursue this legislation?
There were two things, in fact. The first was working in local government. So I worked for the League of California Cities for a number of years, and during that time represented cities in the Emerald Triangle, which is Mendocino, Humboldt, Trinity. And I used to hear all of the concerns and problems expressed by local governments as to, the ambiguity associated with cannabis. How do you regulate it? Can you regulate it? The inconsistencies between state and federal law. So that was kind of the first time I really started to delve into this issue. And then fast forward a couple of years later, I was a chief of staff in the legislature, and I was consistently trying to scale back what I felt through my boss was overregulation of business. And I found it fascinating that we had an industry in California that was arguably one of the fastest growing industries, and yet it was completely unregulated. And yet we're California.
We love to regulate.
We love to regulate.
Yeah.
And so it just seemed like a fascinating undertaking. And I think one of the things I used to say is, unlike most public policy endeavors, I got to draw the lines on the football field before the game was played. And most people don't ever get to do that in their career.
Yeah. So those lines are still being drawn.
Yes, they are.
And those lines very much have to change with the federal climate and the federal legislation.
Yes.
What in California, what has changed since 2014 to 2021? We've progressively been creating the lines on this football field, and many entrepreneurs, many business owners, many folks in the workforce are trying to figure out how to make a go in the formal market. How has the policy landscape changed over the last 6 years or so?
Well, it's much more normalized. I mean, I remember walking in the halls of the Capitol and having trouble getting meetings. I mean, it was, there were a lot of jokes. There were a lot of people that didn't want to have this conversation. And so as we started to embark on these policy changes, it became more normalized. And so now it's very easy to get a meeting in the Capitol. And when I think about that experience as a lobbyist, that is also what's happening in the field. So, you have public support increasing. All the polls indicate that the vast majority of the public supports medicinal cannabis, and actually the majority supports legalizing cannabis for adult use. And so I think, that has happened at a rapid pace. And so with that, the policy has, in some instances, become less burdensome. In other instances, we have a lot to work on, but the policy landscape has evolved tremendously, I think, as individuals have become more accustomed to cannabis. It's more mainstream. That's also changed the kind of players that are coming in. So we started with, legacy operators who wanted to get into this business in large part because they didn't want to be regulated. And now you have mainstream companies trying to come in and figure out how to craft a business plan and engage in this arena. So it's been an incredible process to witness and to be part of, and it's continuing to evolve over time.
And California has California for all. That's the motto, right? And we're in a political landscape where we're trying to create equity programs. We're trying to ensure that the legacy businesses have a seat at the table while encouraging new people to come into this industry, formalizing the industry. What are some of the current issues that just took place in the most current legislature that you're supportive of and the folks that you work for support?
Well, you touched on equity, and social equity has been and continues to be a significant priority for this legislature and for the industry. So in thinking and back on this legislative year, which was a difficult one in the era of COVID. Lobbying virtually is very hard. But we advanced some policy around social equity that we are sincerely hopeful will provide more pathways for applicants who were impacted by the war on drugs to get into the legal system. And so when I say those policies, it includes there will be a fee waiver and deferral program that will be established for equity applicants.
At the state level?
At the state level.
Fantastic.
Yes, and we actually secured $30 million in one-time funding for that program to get it started. There is $35.5 million that will be allocated to local governments with social equity programs or to implement social equity programs. And that money can actually be used to provide support to applicants. So the money can flow directly to applicants and licensees. Mm-hmm. So significant funding for that. But we have a lot more work to do in the area of social equity, and so we do anticipate more policy initiatives in the legislature in 2022, including establishing a statewide definition for social equity and possibly putting some additional parameters around the local grant program to ensure that that money is getting out the door as promptly as possible, because it really varies jurisdiction by jurisdiction, as you can imagine.
And you have experience in local government.
I do.
And so you understand what a functioning, healthy local government accountability system is and kind of where local government can fall short. Mm-hmm. And what I've learned, right, because I'm new to cannabis and I'm trying to understand, it literally varies city by city, locality by locality. There's some parts of California where there is no access.
Right.
You cannot, even though it's legal in California, it's not legal in this county or in this city. And other places that fully embrace it, I think San Francisco is probably a great example. Could you talk a little bit about what a place like San Francisco, how they have done it right? Mm-hmm. And without naming names, what are some of the problems that other localities are facing?
Well, I definitely want to touch on that question, but you raised a really good point that I think is critical for people to understand, and that is the framework that is in effect in California rests on or is premised on local control and authority. So when we think about commercial cannabis activity and where it is authorized and where it is not, that is a decision of local governments. So we have 482 cities and we have 58 counties. Really only only a third of those jurisdictions are even authorizing commercial cannabis activity. So that is a huge point of contention for the industry. It creates significant access deserts. So when you ask me what jurisdictions are doing things correctly, I would say it's those that are actually authorizing. And San Francisco is a fabulous example of a city and county that I think is really working to get it right. And when you ask me about social equity, I think their social equity program in particular, while all of them could probably use some fine-tuning in working with and talking directly with social equity applicants, I think San Francisco has really tried to hone in on what some of those barriers are in terms of getting into the commercial system. They've engaged with a lot of associations like the Bar Association to provide pro bono legal support. So they've really tried to examine what those barriers look like. And I also have heard that they have been pretty efficient in terms of getting money and resources out to those applicants. And you don't see that in all of the jurisdictions. In fact, one of the organizations I work with, the California Cannabis Industry Association, will be releasing this week an accountability report which evaluates the first 7 jurisdictions that implemented a social equity program. And so that is going to be out and for review by the public and for the legislature, and they've included several recommendations for change to ensure that those pathways for applicants continue to be available and are actually maximized.
Accountability reporting for social equity programs in California.
That's correct.
That is a step forward, is it not? That is like actual education, reporting. That's going to not just normalize the industry, but it's going to hold the industry accountable to achieving higher standards.
Well, I think the industry as well as local governments. So the local governments who are recipients of those funds, the intent is not to be critical, but to better inform locals of areas where they can improve their programs for the benefit of the very applicants that they are supposed to be helping.
So I've spoken with Rashad Johnson, Government Affairs at Ease, who worked for Senator Bradford and many other Kika Keith, social equity, entrepreneur from LA. What I'm hearing is there is no model in the United States for doing this.
No.
California truly are trailblazers. How do you balance California legislation and kind of moving, drawing the lines on the field here with changes at the federal level and how that can impact what you're doing locally?
That is a very good question. I think the way I would try to approach that is, it's been fascinating looking at the evolution of cannabis policy as other states are now embarking on, a framework. Yeah. And so I think California was not the first. We were a little late to the game given the size and scope of the industry at the time. But I think we have the ability to really shape what social equity should look like at the federal level and in other states. So I would consider California a pioneer in this effort. And hopefully we can continue to invest the resources that are necessary to meet the intent and purpose of social equity and really use that as a model at the federal level and again in other states.
So I agree. California is a leader, right? What gets done in California has ripple effects and impacts the rest of the nation. But California has so many issues. We got wildfires. We have, all kinds of other equity issues. How do you keep a focus on cannabis and on moving this industry forward? And do you have any stats on the size of this industry? Like, how big of a potential market is this for California?
Well, the existing market is significant. And for a time, when I first started getting involved in this policy and exploring the base, I believe 50% of the overall market was in California. Now, obviously, that is changing as more states develop frameworks and we are able to gather more data. But what I can tell you is, for instance, the licensed market last year alone in 2020 generated approximately $4.1 billion in taxable sales.
In California?
In California. And
Wow.
that does not, of course, include any unlicensed activity, but this was legal sales in California. And in addition to that, generated a significant number of jobs. In fact, this is an area that is ripe for job growth and new employment opportunities. So California, again, I think continues to be at the forefront in terms of innovation, job growth, consumer base, but we have a long way to go to fine-tune and improve the regulatory environment. And I think with those improvements, we'll actually see an increase in consumer demand in our legal stores.
Yes. But that's incredible that during COVID,
Yes.
the demand, it was deemed an essential industry, which was a huge win, right?
It was a huge win, and it was not an easy win.
Okay, so there's a story behind that as well.
There sure is.
Okay.
There sure is.
Do you want to say anything about that story?
Well, all I'll say is San Francisco actually was not on a path to declare cannabis as essential. And there were other jurisdictions, Santa Clara County, Alameda, that were also really on the fence as to whether or not cannabis should be deemed essential. And so we had to, in very short order, lobby all of the various jurisdictions in the Bay Area. And this is just my theory, but I think that the work that the cannabis industry did to flip a lot of these counties really gave the governor the path to declare cannabis as an essential business at the state level. But it was only after we had flipped about 8 Bay Area counties did that announcement come. And I remember it very clearly. It was a Saturday morning where the list of essential businesses was released. But had a lot of these jurisdictions not declared cannabis essential, I don't know if we would have ended up on that list.
And what the state of the industry would be at if it was not and had to shut down for a number of months. How many businesses would not have survived?
Right.
And this is like a real tension, right? Governor Newsom got a lot of flack. He was, he's a hero to some, an enemy to others, right?
Sure.
It is very difficult to govern California because, as you said, there's only 1/3 of the jurisdictions that have legalized cannabis. 2/3 still not comfortable with it. And yet California used to be 50% of the market. Now there's more competition. But that Emerald Triangle that you're talking about, that has a long, long history and tradition of cultivation. I want to talk about workforce because that's very dear to my heart and to the community colleges, and we want to get there. Can you talk a little bit about cultivation?
Sure.
And what's happening with cultivators now because of this excessive regulation, especially those legacy cultivators that really, grew this industry.
Right.
Like literally grew it.
There's a lot of issues around cultivation that have been ongoing, but they're particularly challenging in this current environment. So what we are seeing is an overabundance of legal product. So we tend to characterize cultivated cannabis as flower, leaves, and trim. And so we're seeing an overabundance of all of those categories. And so what's happened is the wholesale price has dropped pretty significantly. And so cultivators that are larger in scale and have capital will likely survive this drop in the wholesale price. And there's a lot of different debate and discussion around why we have this overabundance. Some say it's in large part because the state has authorized larger scale cannabis cultivation. Others say it's the lack of retail access, because as you noted, only 1/3 of the state authorizes retail. All that aside, however, where does that leave the legacy farmer that's often...
Just a question.
Yeah.
Is it legal for California farmers to ship their product to other states? Okay. Well, that's also a challenge.
Exactly. So any product that is cultivated in California must stay in
I
California.
mean, our agricultural, we produce food for half the country.
Right.
We should be producing cannabis for half the country.
Well, there is a lot of policy discussion around whether or not there's a path for interstate commerce. There was some effort legislatively in 2019 to introduce a bill. Oregon approved a bill that would allow, if and when the federal government authorizes, allow Oregon to engage in interstate agreements to transfer product across state lines. But that aside, the current policy is that you cannot sell cannabis or cannabis products outside of California.
So legacy cultivators that have these craft farms that have cultivated these wonderful products that consumers love, that have, probably been in their family for a generation or more, they might not be able to survive this downturn.
No, this is already a heavily regulated industry. The barriers to entry and the costs associated with being compliant and receiving a state license are significant. So if you are a small cultivator cultivating less than an acre, how do you scale? And when you are also looking at a significant drop in the wholesale price, there are few options for cultivators. What do you do when the price of trim is $30 and the tax is even higher? And that is actually happening.
The tax on the trim is higher than the wholesale price of the product.
That's correct. Currently in the market right now today, trim is selling for $30 a pound. And yet our state requirement taxes cultivated product at $2.87 an ounce.
Are there 16 ounces in a pound?
Yes, there are.
I'll do that math while we're talking.
I believe it's roughly $46.
Wow.
Right.
That doesn't make any sense.
It makes no sense.
Yet it's on the books, and so how do we change the books? Because the books are keeping legacy folks from operating well. We have a lot of small retailers that are, I feel poorly for all the small business owners, right, with all of the supply chain issues that we have, the cost of gas, the cost of everything going up. Like, you have to pass those costs on to consumers. It is very, very difficult to operate under these dynamic environments.
Yes.
Is there a role for government to do something to kind of assuage this?
There is a significant role for government. We, as an industry, have been trying to pursue tax reduction for a number of years now. So we touched on cultivation. Cannabis is taxed at the state level in two areas. First, at cultivation, which is a flat tax, and then there is a 15% excise tax placed on that product at retail. And then after that, the sales tax is applied. So cannabis is heavily taxed. So for many years, the industry has tried to pursue tax reduction and has been unsuccessful in moving the needle. We do hope in 2022 there is a path. We do have some champions out there that are really looking to explore ways that we can reduce cannabis taxes while at the same time not doing so in a manner that doesn't result in a significant reduction in revenues at the state level, because we are a significant revenue generator.
I imagine $4.1 billion in 2020. Do you know how much of that was paid in taxes to?
I couldn't give you any local tax figures, and we haven't even touched on that. But the state actually received $1.1 billion in cannabis tax revenue last year.
That's 25%, at least at the state level, and then there's more local, so it's potentially 35-40% of the total revenue going to government.
Well, I don't know. I'm not sure about the math, but I think it's important to note that the local governments, as I said before, this whole framework rests on local control and authority. local governments have the ability to tax cannabis at every point in the supply chain. So you have some local jurisdictions that will tax at cultivation, will tax when it goes to testing, will tax at distribution, and they'll also apply a retail
Now
tax.
I'm scared
Right.
about federal legislation
Right.
and what adding a federal tax burden is going to do to these because I'm a proponent of entrepreneurship and business, and I want to see good jobs being created. In this industry, if it is truly fast growing, and I've been to some cannabis manufacturers, like from flower to retail, creating great jobs. What are the workforce opportunities in this industry? Like, what kind of jobs, as this industry flourishes, what kind of opportunities will be created for people to?
Well, we've seen consistent job growth every year, and so despite the current challenges and the high regulatory barriers that prevent entry into the legal system, we are still seeing significant job growth. In fact, I have a statistic. So the licensed industry last year added roughly 24,000 good-paying jobs in California, and that translated to a total of 58,000 full-time positions. So we've done a significant amount of work in terms of providing jobs to California residents, and I think the potential continues to be there. And the one thing, too, that people don't recognize is all of the opportunities for ancillary businesses as well. So that marketing, PR, security, compliance is a huge area right now. Environmental compliance work, there's a lot of need to help process our California CEQA requirements. And so the ancillary job opportunities are vast as well. And I don't know if anyone has really thought about or pursued data collection on its impact, the cannabis industry's impact on those types of jobs as well.
So it sounds like another report that the Cannabis...
California Cannabis Industry Association.
They're doing an accountability report on local government and their equity programs, but looking at the workforce impact as well as the tax revenue impact. I mean, this is a major driver of the California economy, and so it needs to be supported. Now, the Case4Cannabis series is sponsored by the California community colleges, and many colleges are starting to look at cannabis curriculum, at workforce pathways. What are some of the benefits to the California community colleges getting involved in this industry? How do you think this will help formalize and kind of destigmatize the industry?
Well, I think it'll help tremendously because a lot of the problems that the industry is facing in terms of the challenges associated with meeting California's rigorous compliance requirements, I'm one voice in the Capitol, and the cannabis industry is kind of one unified voice. And if we could partner with the community college system and non-traditional allies, they could probably really help legitimize what we are saying in terms of what the industry needs. But on the flip side, or just another parallel issue, is this industry, whether you're dealing in cultivation, whether you are working in a testing lab, whether you are manufacturing products, this requires a highly trained workforce. And it's interesting, in my experience, I have gone out and met with local workforce development boards, and they have said to me, we don't know how to provide training. We don't know what a curriculum looks like. And so I think it's a tremendous opportunity for the community colleges to really examine what is needed, because again, these are jobs that require training. These are skilled jobs. And so I think there's just really an opportunity, and it's endless, given the tremendous job growth potential that this industry has.
It's the excitement of being in a nascent industry. How many people get the opportunity to, as you said, draw the lines on the field?
Right.
The community colleges have an out, because I think it's going to take more time for four-year institutions and higher education to fully embrace it. The community colleges have a mandate to do just-in-time education, to really support working Californians to, to adjust to the changing labor market and find quality jobs.
Right.
They could help create the curriculum that can be the foundation for this new workforce pathway.
Yes, they can. Yes, they can.
How else could higher education support your industry? How else, like what else could academia bring that could help?
Well, I think there's a lot of different areas, and we're seeing that. So one of the things that the cannabis tax revenue funds are programs at our California State University system. And so there's a grant program already that where UCs and CSUs can apply for funds. And so we haven't seen the results of some of those studies, but we have different universities exploring barriers to entry or challenges associated with cultivation. We have academia evaluating the efficacy of cannabis. We have academia looking at the economic opportunities associated with cannabis. So water use is another area that I believe a UC is exploring. And so I am really excited to see the outcome of some of that work, because I suspect it will really legitimize a lot of the things that the industry has been saying is needed to truly provide for a more positive business climate that supports this industry, that is supporting job growth and economic development opportunities in this state.
So it seems very clear we have some work to do on the regulation on the tax side.
Yes.
We have work to do on the academic career pathway side to build this out. There's work to do at the national level to figure out how to mix local authority with federal policy. Let's just close with, where's this industry going? You've been around this work for a long time. The next 3 to 5 years are going to be very critical. Where do you think this industry is going to go, and where would you like to see it go? How would you like to push it in the next 3 to 5 years?
I would like to see a less regulatory, burdensome construct. So we need to really look at our current system and figure out where we can reduce regulation to make it easier to enter the compliant market. So that's kind of one thing I'd like to see happen in the next 3 to 5 years, and I think we can do that. We certainly need to re-examine our tax structure. I think that's going to be an important component of this broader work that I am very, very excited to be part of. And so I think that's some of the policy objectives that we're exploring. We need to examine ways to migrate more consumers to the legal market. There's still a very significant unlicensed market, so that's another area. But in approaching your question in a different way, where is the industry going to be in 3 to 5 years? I think we're going to continue to see massive growth. I think we're going to continue to see more mainstream companies enter this market. I think we're already hearing about, the alcohol industry and pharma and the tobacco industry. I think that's going to continue to happen. We're going to continue to see an evolution of products. So it's really amazing the type of products that are online and under development right now. So I think with the continued R&D, we'll see a lot more product lines developed. And I would like to hope that, as this industry becomes more mainstream, again, there is still that path for those legacy operators that really pave the way for this industry at the onset. That's the area where I think I'm most concerned, is trying to figure out a path for those legacy operators to continue to do business in the state.
I like that. I think that's really important. You really laid out a really nice broad spectrum. And I just really hope that you and many others that are kind of pushing these issues and building coalitions and kind of garnering support are able to, help this industry grow and thrive with equity at the center.
Right.
But then with also, enough, this idea for California for all, if we can really keep that front and center. So that has been wonderful. Thank you so much for your time, Amy.
It's my pleasure. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
All right.